Good afternoon. Welcome to MedTech Crossroads, episode 64 today. We are so glad that you are with us. Today, just a few announcements and then into the main event. We have with us today Dr. Philip Levy from Wayne State University. He'll be talking to us looking forward, looking current, looking back at COVID, some good hard-hitting stuff there. We're looking forward to that with him. And then as always, Q&A at the end or announcements. If there's anything happening in the community, tell us about it. We're going to tell you about a few things happening in the community right now. We are not doing our normal COVID metrics and vaccine distribution data today because we've got Dr. Levy here, so we'll be talking about that in just a minute. I do want to show you this graphic that was one of the prompts to have him on the show, and that is the community transmission level in the state of Michigan. It was one thing that we always sort of looked at and said, wait, we're not hearing this talked about. It's one of the things we're hoping he can unpack for us today a little bit as we talk in a bit. Later on, speaking of COVID, in partnership with MedHealth, we're going to be having two episodes later in the month, one on COVID vaccines, boosters, and variants, and the other on the Detroit-Windsor border. When should it reopen? It's a major trade route, and want to know what should be happening there. Also want to remind you, the quarterly pitch party just finished up for June. It'll be happening again as we approach September. So if you know of any MedTech startups, they don't have to be in Michigan, they can be anywhere. In fact, we've had a lot of great entrants from outside the state, but we'd love to see more in the state as well. Come and tell us about the pitch that you want to give. The plan is the pitch party happens in the days leading up to the end of the quarter. That's be the last show in September will be the judging for the pitch party. But each startup that wants to pitch gets 10 minutes at the end of a show leading up to the end of September. And the pitch deck can be sent to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org. We'd love to have 5 or 10 startups for that pitch party. Problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and ask or functionally equivalent areas. And send us that. We are welcoming startups in the months of probably August and September to pitch. And just like we did at the end of this last month, we will award $2,500 to the startup that our judges tip their hat towards. Into Being does not participate in the voting, but we do provide the prize. Our judges are Andy Rader from Evergreen M&A Partners, Dr. Nikki Kennedy of Arbor Hive, Jim Metzger of Keystone Solutions Group, and Stacy Frankovich, the program manager at MedHealth. So we thank them for their participation during our last show. Also want to remind you of the A2 Biosocial happening monthly. Guess what? They're finally getting back to in-person. It's presented by Mish Bio, Ann Arbor Spark, and MyLead. They did it in a park last time. This time it's going to be Tuesday, July 13th, from 4:30 to 6:30, which, as I understand, is a slightly different date and time than usual. And the address there in Ann Arbor, York, 1928 Packard Street in Ann Arbor. So I know Matthew and the crew would love to see you at that event. Those are our short and brief announcements today. I want to welcome our guest, Dr. Philip Levy, onto the show, his second time appearing with us on MedTech Crossroads. Dr. Levy, welcome.
Gene, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate your being here and under slightly more breathable circumstances than I think the last time that we had the privilege of talking together. But I remember one thing from the last time that you and I chatted together, and every time we have, you're very much equal opportunity when it comes to saying what you feel needs to be said. And we've always appreciated that about you. You have appointments in emergency medicine, cardiovascular, physiology, and you're the assistant VP of research at Wayne State. You've had kind of a front row seat throughout the last year plus. As I understand, you've also been a movie COVID czar. Tell us for just a second about that.
Yeah, so in addition to the titles and roles I have at Wayne State, I'm also Chief Innovation Officer for Wayne Health. And Wayne Health is the physician practice group, independent from the university, but aligned with the university. And so the point of that's relevant because we started doing our COVID testing program, as I think I discussed on the last episode that we worked together. Our COVID testing program, standing up testing sites in the city and in Dearborn initially, drive through, working to create a whole mobile health outreach program. that information made its way to Steven Soderbergh, who was directing, and making No Sudden Move here in Detroit. It was initially called Kill Switch, and then they changed the name. But he started to direct the movie. They started the movie production right before the COVID pandemic hit. They had to shut everything down. They wanted to start it back up, and he reached out to me to help out with the movie. And so we set up a whole COVID testing protocol with them, and basically helped design a bubble for all of the cast. They all stayed, and crew, they all stayed at the Element Hotel downtown. We had different zones in terms of who was in closest proximity to the actors, who obviously, and for obvious reasons, couldn't be masked. So we did testing every other day, 3 times a week, for the cast and anybody who was in close proximity to the cast, and then spaced it out a little bit more a week later, once a week for the rest of the group, and basically just did a lot of monitoring and close contact tracing, and really kept it a very tight thing. And it was quite an interesting process to be part of, particularly during the pandemic. But I was really excited that we had only one temporary shutdown related to some false positive results, which we had to trace down, and only one person who was not directly related to the film. The close proximity to the actors was positive. So all in all, it was an amazing experience. And I think a good lesson in how you can keep COVID out of a bubbled community if everybody is conscientious about their behavior and doing the right thing. That includes masking when they were offset, or when they were going to be in any kind of close proximity to each other, the actors and the crew, that is. And people just doing the right thing, getting everyone to believe that you can be relatively contained for a 10 or 12 week filming time and you'll be okay, right? Just suck it up and get through the movie so we can make the production. And it went well. And I saw some chat comments that it's a great movie. It's now on HBO Max. I have no connection with the film anymore, but it is a great movie. And I was fortunate to be able to go out to the world premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it was just great to see on the big screen.
That's really fun. And yeah, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we have Jeff there saying, great movie, saw it last night. Thanks for that, Jeff. We appreciate that. I think it's fascinating because that's an amazing experience that you had with that. Of course, your position with innovations there, what led to that. You've had quite an amazing seat to see in some of the hardest hit areas, obviously, Southeast Michigan, Wayne County, Oakland County, a number of these places where things have been very challenging over the last year and a half. I would love for you to take us through what your roles are and what seat that's given you and what it's allowed you to sort of see at a 40,000 foot view over the last year and a half. And I do want to mention to our audience, feel free in the Q&A, if you've got questions for Dr. Levy, type them in there. We will we'll review those and bring them up. But go ahead, anytime you've got a question, just type it into the Q&A. No need to wait to the end for that. But take us, Dr. Levy, through the positions that you hold and what roles you really sat in that allowed you to have a seat to watch this unfold.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to kind of walk this through, because it is a little bit complicated. So my day job, at least for the longest time, has been as an emergency physician, but I have academic oversight for research, clinical research at Wayne State, and had been building up a clinical research environment prior to COVID for last 15 years that would really facilitate our ability to help address the needs of the population in Detroit. In particular, having the accessibility of health data to know where in the community highest risks exist, do targeted outreach in those communities, and then try to design interventions that meet the needs of the population, in the sense that what are the factors that contribute to outlier risk in community A versus community B, and let's give these types of resources to A and see if we can level the playing field compared to B. So we were setting up the environment for all of that at Wayne State, and and because we were doing this in the vision of population health, where we would take this data that we've been aggregating from multiple health systems, we would pull it together, use it for targeted outreach into communities to, let's say, decrease heart disease deaths, knowing that improving blood pressure or improving diabetes would contribute to that. And within that mindset, I then reached out to Wayne Health, who has always been around. They were formerly Wayne State Physician Group, but now have been migrating to a new name, reached out to the leadership and said, hey, we're doing this work. Maybe it's time to start thinking about population health within Wayne Health. And we were kind of, matched up. And then COVID hit, and we were looking for where to go with this kind of vision. And COVID, for unfortunately, all the wrong reasons, but for the right circumstance, was a perfect opportunity to implement this type of approach. So what we first started doing was saying, okay, well, COVID's here, March 10th, the first case. By March 20th, we set up drive-through testing sites at Wayne Health in Detroit and with our partner Access in Dearborn. And we tested about 3,000 people in the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, healthcare workers, first responders, police, medics, you name it. We focused really on who were the high risk, tier 1 healthcare workers that were approved for testing at the time. Anybody that was, needed to get back to work, needed to get away from people so they don't infect many people. We were set up for that, but then quickly realized, as everyone else did, that it was the populations and the communities of color in Detroit, especially in surrounding areas, that were getting hit really hard. So we started using our mapping potential to try to figure out what communities we needed to really be in. Reached out to the Ford Motor Company, and their Ford X division came in and worked with us. And we created a mobile health outreach program that initially was, we started that on April 13th, and initially was all funded by philanthropy organizations like the community organized relief effort Corps, which is Sean Penn's foundation. They gave us almost $530,000 to support our efforts. The United Way of Michigan came in with several $100,000. The Community Health Fund for Southeast Michigan, DMC Foundation, a whole bunch of other partners, Ralph Wilson Foundation, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan Foundation. I mean, I can go on, but they were all there to really come support what we were doing. And at the same time, the state started building up their health disparities task force. They started looking at what we were doing, included us in the design process. And then the state started funding our health disparities, our approach as a key measure to get testing into communities of color, and then ultimately get vaccines into communities of color. Because as we were building out this mobile health vision, not only do we have vehicles from Ford X, we had their engineers coming on site and doing form and factor function analysis type of stuff, where they would just sit there and watch what's going on, and we would be able to put some modifications on the beta versions of the vehicles, ultimately getting to a point where we had a stable design that the state purchased several vehicles for us. And then even Steven Soderbergh, who was so grateful for the work we did in the movie, he donated the purchase of 2 additional vehicles for us. So we created this fleet of 5 vehicles that we've been deploying around the community since like I said, originally April 2020, but then in September we got these new vehicles, and the whole thing kind of changed and took off from there. So you're right, I do have a unique seat, because in the very beginning, when we were doing these testing, at different locations and drive-through sites, we couldn't find viral transport medium. We couldn't get swabs. We didn't know the labs were going to be able to run this swab versus that swab. We would, have a promise of a 2-day turnaround time, and it took 9 or 11 days sometimes, and chasing people down to get the results and all. I mean, it was a mess trying to figure this out, but we did it. And we, so we saw the very beginnings, saw all the chaos that comes from not being prepared for something like this, worked very closely with the city of Detroit as they stood up their testing site, at the fairgrounds, was in contact with the mayor's office on a number of different occasions throughout the pandemic related to this. So I've gotten to see the government interaction, worked with the state level, worked with the philanthropy community, I've worked with the clinical community. And so, yeah, I've kind of seen all perspectives of this. And I'd say as a summary statement on this, I can't believe we're still talking about it. That's all.
We'll unpack that here in a minute as we get into it. Yeah, appreciate that overview. Well, one of the things that longtime viewers of our show will note, and when we switched this from COVID Connect more than a year ago to MedTech Crossroads, where we generally talk about MedTech development stuff, the audience said, if there's COVID news, we still want to hear about it.
Yeah. We're
just trying to put data out there. We still want to hear about it. And what that first was the COVID. I'm blanking on the name. There's a wonderful, someone's going to remind me in chat, but there was a wonderful group that was just aggregating COVID raw data, and they did a great job of it. They eventually said, we think CDC is doing a good enough job. And in fact, some of the CDC's dashboards in the last 6 months have been really nice. We usually on the show, we'll just unpack the Michigan one to see what's been happening. And one of the things that we started to notice is that most of the things you've heard reported on the news, you can find it in the dashboard in a little more obtuse form. And so maybe not so many surprises, but one of the things, and I showed it at the beginning as we were going through our news, was the community spread over the last, well, if we go back 4 months, the community spread in the state of Michigan peaked. It was at red. It was the highest level that CDC was recording. It stayed there for approximately 3 months, and only in the last month has it dramatically dropped off. And this is something we don't hear talked about a lot. I don't know, which narrative it works with and which narrative it doesn't work with, but it's a missing data point for us. And I wanted to ask you, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the show, was starting with the question of community spread. What's going on there? Why did we see this dramatic redness in the Michigan graph, at least, for the 3 months prior to this month? What does it mean? How do we interpret that? What does it mean going forward?
So I think it's important to understand community spread is different than overall prevalence or overall case load. There's very different ways to understand how coronavirus, COVID-19 is impacting a population. Community spread is really looking at of those who are tested, how much is positive. And there are ways you could look at it. It could be set by percentages of test results. It could be set by numbers of test results per 100,000 population in the community. The numbers are all set relatively low to indicate moderate to higher transmission. If you look at the overall percentage of positive tests, you jump into the moderate to high range if you get above 5 to 10%. And that none of us would consider 5 to 10% of most things that critical, but here you're talking about a virus that can kill people, so it's obviously important. If you start to see, going from 0 cases to 5 or 10 transmitted cases per 100,000, even though the overall numbers are not that high, it still flags as relatively high community transmission. So that's an important thing to understand. We're not doing widespread community surveillance, random sampling of populations to determine spread. We're taking people who go and for whatever reason elect to get tested. There's bias in whom those people are. They may have to get tested for work. They may have been exposed. They may have symptoms. And so it's hard to just follow one trend of numbers and say, aha, this is the thing that's pointing to something. But what we do know is that the overall caseload, as you said, started to rise and now has petered off very nicely, which we're all grateful for. And it kind of begs the question, what was it a few months ago? Was it the introduction in the beginning of the Delta variant? Was it other things that were occurring? It's hard to say all of that. But what we do know is that once you start to get widespread community transmission, 2 things occur. Depending on the percentage or the relative vaccination in the community, you either have an abrupt stop to it or continued transmission. The only way the virus spreads is when there's a host for it to spread to. And the only hosts that are available to spread to are the unvaccinated people. Now, vaccinated people will have breakthrough cases, but the numbers are so low. So we're not really talking about vaccinated people, being spreaders per se. And all the data that are coming out now look like the vaccines do a reasonable job against this variant and other variants in terms of the vaccinated person getting infected. But what we
so even I think we saw that with Johnson & Johnson, but we're saying that this, and we're going to talk about Delta variant in a minute, but that we're starting to see even against the variants, we're seeing better responsiveness.
Yeah, and better responsiveness. And just again, I think it's important to understand that it's not just the percentage of all the vaccinated people that you want to see the responsiveness. You're trying to decrease the hosts, right? That's really the critical issue. And so what we talked about, on the phone a few weeks ago, the reason you start to see after a big caseload a drop off is as people get infected and recover, they have about 3 to 4 months of immunity that comes from getting infected. And so during that period, you have fewer hosts available for the virus to spread to. The person who was sick is not going to go around other people, so they're not transmitting it. The person who was sick and exposed vaccinated people, so what, right? They're not going to get sick or at least get very sick from it. And so that is where this kind of comes together when you're thinking about community-wide transmissibility and transmission. There's only so many hosts that are available. And as you start to get those people infected and they do the things that they're supposed to do, which is separate from everyone else, you'll see a drop off on the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because you're reducing the number of people who it can jump to. I mean, it's great there are all these people out there, but if I'm the virus and I want to go infect somebody, I need somebody who's infectable, who hasn't seen this before, whose immune system isn't ready to respond to it. No, it makes perfect sense. And you mentioned the 3 to 4 months of immunity. That's actually the first time I've heard that number for natural infections. Do we have data? I mean, we've heard everything across the board, and it's often been contradictory as to, I think, at one point it's been said that nothing can ever be better than a good, solid, natural infection that you survive. That's the question mark, right? And then at other times we've heard say that no, the vaccine is going to do a better job at stimulating your immune system than the disease will. I think it's clear at this point that a mild case of the disease is not necessarily going to give you immunity, and the vaccine is tailored to give you a strong immune response. That much is clear. But let's just compare a strong case of the disease to the vaccine. Do we actually have solid numbers at this point in terms of what quote unquote immunity looks like following? And we recognize immunity is kind of it's a weird word, but we've heard 3 to 4 months. I think J&J was quoting 8 months for theirs. Do we really know at this point, comparing those two, or are we still looking for data?
We don't, right? And we have a little bit of a muddying of the water because you have some people who were exposed, who were recommended to get vaccinated, even in, especially amongst the highest risk groups, right? I don't think we could have taken the time to take all 65-year-olds and let the natural experiment run as to whether they need to be vaccinated or not. But what we've done, so knowing that the population was very vulnerable, a lot of them got infected and recovered, and a bunch of that, that group is vaccinated. It's a mixed bag at this point. But what we do know from just immunity in general is to really stoke the immune system to get it to produce, it needs to have a sufficient and robust stimulus. And when you're talking about, exposures and severity of exposures and COVID infections, a lot of the cases are really just asymptomatic. I picked it up because I had a work-related requirement to get tested. And those individuals, who knows how long the virus has been there, who knows if they had some of their own innate immunity that protected them from the virus. But what we do know is that it was detected in their nasal passage. That doesn't mean it was absorbed into their immune system at large. That could have been the extent of where their virus exposure lived, right? Somebody sneezed, I breathed it in, and then, somebody swabbed me, but I never got infected. To think that that's going to produce the level of inoculation needed to confer protection, we don't know. So why take a chance and develop what at least is the single dose? And that's where, all the vaccines that are in EUA now were preceded by dose ranging, to figure out what is the right level of the injection. Dose ranging trials, settle on the right dose, know that you're going to elicit a consistent immune response across everybody, and that's the goal. Now, we do believe that people who were more severely infected, symptomatic, particularly with fever responses and those types of things, they definitely mounted an immune response. And there's not a lot of reason to think that the immune response from that level of infection should be different than the vaccine itself. Remember, the vaccine, the mRNAs, only trigger one specific protein to be made. A virus is thousands, if not more, proteins, and each one of them triggers the immune system to produce an antibody to something, right? And so it's all the mix of those other proteins that, that are really critical. Now, what's so special about the spike protein is really how the virus enters the cell, through the spike protein connecting to the receptors. And so that's why that one is such a good one to target, because it's always going to be there on the virus all the time, right? But to get back to your original question and point, it's tough. And so rather than chance it, that's why the vaccines are recommended for everybody, just because we can't really know for sure your level of inoculation.
I love your description of that, because it shows some of the complexity of it. So if I understand correctly, on the vaccine side, we've got a very, very unique key to this virus, and we can really trigger you on that very unique key. And on the other side, we've got a whole bunch of keys that are all really important, but it's hard to tell, other than symptomatology, did you get triggered strongly? Like if we knew you were triggered really, really strongly, we would think this is really good. But for all those people who went out and because of their job, they had to get a test and it came back positive, and they say to themselves, oh, I'm great, I had COVID, I'm safe. The answer is we can't say that from this data. That's not something we can say. And that's where the vaccine becomes important.
Yeah, and I like your analogy because the spike protein is the key to the front door if you want to keep going with that. And so that makes sense for that to be the one to target.
No, that's great. I appreciate your unpacking that in such detail, because that's what we've often been missing, right? People will hear a soundbite somewhere and they immediately glam to their side, the thing that's most comfortable for them, the thing that's most natural for them. And what I appreciate about the way that you shared that is it really unpacks the basic science of what's going on in a way that we have not received, and I certainly couldn't have unpacked, not being expert in it. I guess I want to go, before we go to sort of mask policies and prognostication about the future and stuff like that, let's talk about variants for just a second. Actually, before we do that, I do want to ask a question here that one of our listeners, John Cunningham, asked. What do you see as opportunities and challenges for back to work and back to school testing going forward, screening and surveillance? What role, and this may be, if you want to wait until the latter part where we're talking about prognostication about the future, we can unpack this more then. But maybe a quick answer here. What role is testing going to play going forward? We've certainly seen the number of tests, I believe, are starting to go down at this point because fewer people are presenting. Any quick prognostication there on the future?
Well, I can tell you a couple of things. Number one, not only is the number of tests going down, the interest in being tested is going down. And I think they go hand in hand. And I don't mean to be, sort of silly saying that. I just mean that I think for a lot of people in their mind, COVID is over. And it's, I think that's going to present a barrier to any ongoing testing, particularly if it's voluntary. I think the other piece is that we have to really balance testing as a means to avoid ongoing transmission of the virus when we have an answer already, which is a vaccine. You know what I'm saying? So ongoing testing has a role in a world where we have still transmissible virus because there's not efficient vaccination in the community, right? And so I think testing to me remains a solution for maybe the wrong problem. The problem is how do we get more people vaccinated, honestly. I think that's one piece. I think the school is still an issue, right? Because you're going to have up to 12 years old who are not vaccinated right now. But the way those individuals, the up to 12-year-old population is going to get exposed is through their family. Very few of these kids, unless they go to daycare or whatever it is, are going to be outside of their general environment. And so if parents are vaccinated, kids are not going to get the virus in all likelihood. And so, it really all kind of points to the same answer, which is let's get more people vaccinated and not look to test and separate people who have the virus from those that don't, because that's not the way forward.
It's interesting you say that, because I think back to when we were looking at flu numbers. And of course, one of the first indications we had that COVID was a thing was flu testing. I remember looking at this. I pulled so many years of data and looked at it, and flu testing hadn't stopped. But by the point where we were in the year, the positivity rate had dropped through the floor. It wasn't like they stopped testing for flu. They were still testing for it, but the positivity rate had dropped off. In other words, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the hosts were now picking up on this new virus. But we don't think of, in a normal world, we don't think of testing as being our solution. We think of, trying to keep people's immune systems healthy and trying to deal with it in other ways. So that's a very interesting point you make, that testing is really responsive to something emergent, not where we want to be as a society.
Yeah, and just to kind of go a little bit further on what you were saying, we flu test everybody who comes into the hospital who's going to get admitted, who looks like they might have influenza, so we reduce transmission amongst people in the hospital. We don't routinely test everybody who comes in the door for flu, especially if you're young and healthy, go home and get better. So again, I think it's to your point that it has a very specific purpose. But the interesting thing that we did see here, and I think this may influence not masking policy, but masking practice, is the almost nil cases of true influenza that we saw this year. And it's true, it's evidence that masks work to prevent respiratory droplet transmitted infections, which is a good thing.
And most of us did not get our normal sniffles that we had all year. No, it's very true.
That kind of speaks to some of this, just the protective measures. testing for influenza is not the reason why we didn't have influenza cases. It's because people were not transmitting influenza. And
Yeah,
there
that's
was
great.
another question, Dean, before we go, that I just want to make sure people are clear. Somebody brought up about host and what that really means. And in the bacterial virology, any kind of sort of scientific world, the host is the thing that gets infected. So humans are typically the host that we refer to, although any animal can be infected by a virus or bacteria. But the host is the thing getting infected. And so you're only a host if you're susceptible to the infection. And the way that you become not susceptible to the infection is to have been, for the most part, previously exposed and therefore having some level of immunity, or you've been vaccinated, or you have you were born with it immunity, although that's incredibly rare.
And so the population of people without one of those two situations is the target for the disease, and it's going to try to get there.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's amazing how adaptive it is too. Well, and speaking about that, so we've got these variants, and I mean, this is one of those places where it's like, how much or how little do you worry? I think to your point, maybe I can even make your point for you. I think what you're going to say is, if people had either had it or were vaccinated, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But we're only having the discussion of variants because there are still hosts out there. I think that's sort of your resounding message for the day as I'm hearing it. But when it comes, go ahead, please.
I just want to go along on that. Not only are there variants because there are hosts available, because there are hosts available, there are variants, because the Delta variant and every other version of coronavirus that infects a human is replicating millions and millions of times. And each time that virus replicates, there's a chance of a mistake. And that's mutation. And the chance of a mistake occurring that makes the virus die and go away is equally as likely as a chance that the virus has some mutation that makes it more powerful and more infective. And that's what the Delta variant is. And so every time the virus replicates, there is a chance of a mutation. Slim, very minimal, but if you do it millions and billions of times, doesn't matter how small the chance is, it's going to occur. And that's what people aren't quite getting. It's the allowing the virus to keep replicating is what's going to continue this going on forever.
To be able to have the hosts, that you can have the replication, that you can have the mutations, and off you go.
Exactly. I mean, there's going to be, we've seen it go from the Brazilian variant and the UK variant and the Delta variant. There are going to be other variants. And, when we start to look at the future state, it's how, it's a race against time to decrease the hosts, to decrease the replications, to decrease the variants, because who knows which variant may come out and be completely immune, or not immune, but, resistant to the vaccines. Right. So that's what we really want. That's I think what is getting a little bit lost in this political football of vaccinations and masks and this, that, and the other. We just got to stop the virus from replicating. And the only way to do that, people have to be infected or they have to get vaccinated. There's no other way.
Reduce the hosts, reduce the hosts, reduce the hosts.
And you can try to do that by masking, right? Or separating people. That's another way to reduce the host. You just reduce the exposure. But those folks are still not protected until this thing completely disappears from the environment, and it's not going to disappear from the environment when there are still people who it's being carried by.
You're basically punting the football down the field there. You're not really getting to the reduce the hosts, which seems sort of a resounding theme today. When you look at the variants, talk to us about variants and what we do and don't know about that. It would strike me, based on what we've talked about today, that the variants are probably going to be, well, I guess we don't know, right? Because if we're looking at the spike, the variant should be responsive to that, but the actual disease might give you more against the variant. That's sort of a prognostication. I mean, is that true? What do we know about the variants? I hate to say it this way, how worried should we be? How much should we feel like, no, the problem really is just reduce hosts and then this goes away?
Well, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but yeah, the Delta variant is more contagious, which just means that you are more likely to get infected if you get exposed, and it may produce a more severe illness. Doesn't mean that you will die from it. It just means that it may feel worse, or a certain subsegment of the population may be more likely to die. That type of stuff we don't necessarily know. We don't necessarily know the Delta variant specifically why it's like this. But as you alluded to, we've seen preliminary data that suggests that the vaccines to varying degrees, Pfizer and Moderna probably most effective, prevent not only infections with the variant, the Delta variant specifically, 88, 98% effective, but it prevents the hospitalizations and people getting sick. And the one thing that we are seeing is that of everybody who comes to the hospital now, 98, 99% of them are not vaccinated people. When people are getting sick and severely ill, it's the non-vaccinated population that it's, inflicting this on. So, I think it's important to be fearful of the variants, right? And the big fear is, is there going to be a variant that eludes what we've done with the vaccines, eludes the immune response to vaccines? That's the biggest fear of everybody. So far, it hasn't panned out, but I think it's a legit fear as long as the virus is replicating.
That's an interesting point. That's good. So if we look, we've got another question here. Let's just touch on this really quick, since we're on vaccines and stuff. New information about the safety of the vaccines for people with compromised immune systems. And I have to confess, I'm not aware of the base nature of the question. Did we have information that that vaccines were dangerous for immunocompromised patients? Has anything new come out about that? I guess maybe holistically looking at that topic.
I think the biggest danger for immunocompromised folks with the vaccine is the uncertainty about the effectiveness in that individual. You don't want to get a false sense of security just because you're vaccinated. There are things to look at, antibody responses, although the CDC is not recommending that right now as a way to look to see if you are truly, responsive to the vaccine. There are other things you could look at, because I think we talked about it last time. Not that everyone will remember, but you have the antibodies which we test for, but the real immunity lies in T cells. It lies in the cells that exist dormant but ready to spring into action should you be exposed to the virus in the future. That type of T cell activity is an important indicator of the true effectiveness of exposure and long-term vaccine responses. That may be one way to look for an immunocompromised state if you're responsive, but it's a tough one. I think there's no evidence that it's going to produce harm any more so or less so in an immunocompromised person. The real question is, did it produce anything at all that's going to be protective?
Gotcha. No, that's great. Well, when you and I talked last, I think you had some very hard-hitting words, and I'd welcome you to bring them back when it comes to, there's sort of, we've seen people who are very much, I'm going to do it my way, and it kind of comes on both quote unquote sides. As you said earlier, why are we even having this discussion? But you've got the people who feel like, okay, I don't want my personal liberties challenged. You've also got the people who are like, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to shame everybody else into doing the right thing. Talk to us about these perspectives, and where are you with the whole masking question right now?
So let's start with the basis of what a mask does, right? A mask prevents, for the vast majority, your airborne respiratory droplets from being transmitted beyond your immediate, 6-foot zone, 3-foot zone, whatever it might be. There's some evidence that masks protect you, particularly as you go up in quality. N95, KN95 masks, they're much more protective for you as a person, but the whole general principle of masking is to prevent the transmission from you to someone else. We know that the vaccines are all extremely effective against the virus itself, and that even if you were to get the virus after you got vaccinated, the very, very small chance that you have a breakthrough infection, the length of time you're going to be a carrier, the amount of time that's going to be your body is markedly diminished because your body fights it off immediately. And so effectively, there's not a lot of reason to mask up if you're trying to prevent coronavirus and you're already vaccinated, right? And one of the reasons to do it, and sort of the let's mask, like you said, is I'm going to show these folks who aren't masking that masking still matters. And then we're talking about potential mandates and changing up the mindset. And you're really going to put mandates on the folks who are already complying with the masking because they want to shame the folks who don't want to mask into masking. The people who you're going to tell they now have to mask aren't going to do it, right? They're going to be resistant to it. And so what are you really doing in the end? Right. And so, I thought about this morning, Gene, and I think I came up with a really great analogy for you. Okay. We know the vaccine saves lives. There's no doubt about that. Right. You don't disagree with me, right? I think we all would agree vaccines save lives. Seatbelts save lives, right? No disagreement about that. If you don't want to wear a seatbelt, should I drive slower with my seatbelt on to protect you? Why would I do that? Why would your unwillingness to do something that protects you force me to compromise what I'm doing to protect you when you don't want to protect me? It creates this whole sort of conundrum that I think we have to have an open and honest conversation about in this country. And we're not having that. What we are having is demonstrative here and demonstrative here, hoping that this demonstration will convince this group or this demonstration will convince this group. And everybody's so dug in, nobody's looking to be convinced. They're just looking to continue to try to prove their point. And it's very frustrating to see it from this side because, again, we know the answer that we have, which is vaccination. And I think, if you want to kind of tie it together with a nice bow, the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that needs to happen, there was a nice article in the New York Times about this today, is the government needs to put a stamp of approval on these vaccines and get them all out of EUA status and put them all in approved status. Tell the people who you're telling to get the vaccine, we believe it's okay, and here's the proof. You want that, that's what's gonna, we really need to get to that level. And I think we need to stop, with all of this posturing around mask, no mask, just get vaccinated.
That's a fascinating point too, because I think and again, our work at Into Being is not the drug side, it's the device side, but to make the analogy over there, even to somebody in the industry, you say, well, if you're not going to clear this, if you're not going to give them an approved new drug application, well, why? Are you saying something by that? Like you're saying we can use it and we should use it, but you're not going to give them that? I think it's a phenomenal point, which is let's have some transparency around that. And if it's approvable, let's approve it.
I mean, there have been hundreds of millions of doses that have been administered. Yeah. And the side effect profile, yes, there's been some heart inflammation that has occurred in a very small set of people. Yes, there have been some severe side effects in a very, very small group of people. Yes, there are breakthrough infections in a very, very small group of people. But I don't think we've ever had a period in our recent history where we've done this massive vaccination effort like this and have not seen side effects and have not seen, untoward consequences to the degree that we have, and have clearly seen the effectiveness of the vaccine itself on preventing what it's intended to prevent.
How much bigger of a clinical trial do you need, FDA, right?
Right. I mean, you have millions of people of all different walks of life, rich, poor, black, white, young, old, whatever it is, right? You got it all.
That's a fascinating point. And I think one that we can certainly ask the question, okay, what's standing in the way of this being approved? That's a very, very important question. I guess the hope would be that it's either sadly, just bureaucratic slowness, which is sad, but wouldn't be terribly surprising, or something political. But you certainly hope it's not the basic science of it. But time will tell where that goes.
Right.
Well, if we look into the future, where this goes, I love your analogy of the fewer hosts there are, the less places this can land, and the fewer variants can come up. Focus on that. But let's be just slightly pessimistic and say, okay, there's still going to be some hosts going forward. So we're not going to make the assumption that the problem is completely solved, sadly. Fall is always a hard time. We saw it last fall when everyone went back inside, turned on their HVAC systems, close proximity, couldn't help it in many cases. COVID came back up. Now, we're in a very different place than we were last year, I think, through community transmission, through vaccines, through everything. Give me a couple scenarios. We're not saying this is the one that's going to happen, but take me to this next fall. What are some different scenarios we could see play out?
I think you could see the requests have already been put in for approvals for the pediatric population with Pfizer, for full-scale approval at the FDA level. You could see a sort of opening up of the regulatory pathway, which would allow greater and greater dispensation and comfort with vaccines. And that, I believe, would lead to a sort of dwindling down of the virus, by Christmas, right? You could see something like that. That would be fantastic. You could also see a very rough patch coming up, particularly in states where there's low vaccination rates and where there hasn't been recent transmission. I think, not to belabor the point we talked about before, But if you've had recent transmission in an area, that area is relatively protected by the immunity that comes plus the vaccinations. So you could have 30%, immune, vaccinated, but still have a large number of people who've been infected, and the community will still be protected for a little bit, right? But areas that don't have that are going to be rife for introduction of the infection. And because the Delta variant is predicted to become the dominant strain, it's just going to spread more easily. So, you could see a scenario where, absent any change in the trajectory of vaccinations, as Fauci recently said, 2 countries, right? Swaths of the area that have higher vaccination rates doing better, and other areas that have low vaccination rates seeing some terrible caseloads. And we're already starting to see some signals of that, in places like Missouri, where I saw, some reports this morning that hospitals are once again overrun with COVID infections. That's, if everything kind of stays the way it is and lingers and smolders and everything, you could see a whole new variant that comes in, because, as we often do, we think of the United States as the center of the universe, right? But the fact of the matter is, this is going on in every country. So it's not just the replications in our country, it's the replications and hosts everywhere else that are occurring for the next variant that could pop up. And who knows where that variation may arise. And, there's a potential scenario where, again, like I alluded to, horribly, people are no longer immune based on their vaccine status, and we'd have to start getting boosters to the ever-changing evolution of the virus due to these mutations. It's not entirely similar to the influenza virus, but it is a little bit in that each year you get a cyclical variation, not cyclical, but a variation in the constitution of the virus, and that's why you need a booster every year. And if we don't stop the replication of the virus, you just may get to the point where it's constantly lingering in the background and something new pops up, if not every year, maybe every 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, you can think of this as sort of a curve related to replications and time, and all of that being, a permutation of the likelihood of error occurring in the replication cycle. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but that's the way I think people need to kind of think about this, and they're not necessarily, right? Because they're only thinking about me and what am I in this whole equation, which is understandable, right? People are people, but this is the type of thinking that, I think is the reason why I'm on here with you, and we're getting to talk about this.
That's exactly it. Yeah, this whole idea of let's unpack it. Let's keep our emotions and our feelings and our personal or social interest out of it for a second, and just understand what the landscape is underneath and what's actually happening. It's so huge. Something that we haven't gotten to talk a lot about, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, as we look at the effectiveness of vaccines or infection. We're seeing new stuff for the vaccines. I remember the Lancet did a 26,000 person study on natural infection, and they found that I think it had a mean protectiveness for about 7 months. This was from the UK anyways. But these numbers are measured in months, right? These numbers are measured in 7 months, 8 months, 4 months, that kind of thing. Well, now this has been going on since, March of 2020 in the US. Are you aware of any data that shows us, are we starting to see any indications of lost immunity, 12 months on, 14 months on? Do we really have much data there yet? Or is this just something we're just gonna have to wait and see?
It's going to have to be a wait and see. What we do know is that there are pockets, not huge numbers, and I don't think anybody has the exact percentage of how many people get reinfected, with coronavirus. Is it a different strain that reinfected you? We don't know that, much. But again, I think it goes back to the basic point that we started discussing. It's going to be really hard to know how long immunity lasts if you look at a handful of breakthrough infections as an indication of overall waning immunity in the population. It may just be the same as breakthrough infections in someone who was vaccinated. We don't, that's the part that we don't know. And just considering all the millions upon millions of people who've been infected with coronavirus, if there was not a lot of lasting immunity, and again, we don't know this entirely, but if there was not huge lasting immunity, I think you wouldn't see these tailing off of cases that you're seeing, when an outbreak occurs and everything sort of gets separated again and people are not interacting with each other. I think you'd see much wider spread, break. And, and I think you can think of the very beginning of this. We saw it. It got into the nursing homes. It got into the elderly community. That was April 2020. A year later, April 2021, it was really, and January 2021, younger people, younger populations. And, I think it's gonna, again, we just got to keep narrowing down the potential people who can infect. And but I think, Gene, it's going to be hard, like I said, because you're mixing and matching. You have people who've been infected, who've been vaccinated, people who've been vaccinated, never infect. It's going to be hard to tease all this out.
Yeah, so you're going to see some subset, something happen, and you're not going to be able to necessarily unpack that.
No, it's going to be really hard. And, and in a lot of ways, that's why vaccines is the right answer to every permutation, because we know that it produces at least the level of immune response that you want to prevent subsequent infections and severe infections. So, I think, I don't mean to be simplistic, in distilling it down to that single comment or that single mindset, but, I think it's not worth messing around if you're somebody who's had it before and you think you're safe, but you're in a high risk subgroup, or you're somebody who, is potentially going to be around several hundred coworkers, or in a position where you are going to be a spreader of this. Like, those are the types of things that should weigh in on people's decisions, not just how will I be impacted by this, but how will my decisions impact everyone else around me.
Those are good admonitions. In the few minutes that we have left, Dr. Levy, and I want to tell our audience again, if you have any other questions, thank you for the questions thus far. If you got any other questions for Dr. Levy, feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to get them in before the top of the hour. But in the about 4 minutes that we have left, one of the things we haven't gotten a chance to do is to look retrospectively at this, to tell ourselves the story of the last year and a half. If I gave you 3 minutes to tell me the story of COVID from the vantage point, we're not done. Like, we're not where we're going to be in 10 years telling this story. But how would you summarize the story of COVID over the last year and a half? You're a historian now.
Well, I can summarize it in a couple of words and then expand. It was disbelief until it had to be believed. Right. And I remember I run medical conferences, and I run one in Utah. And I remember we were designing our conference. It was the first week in March. The conference was all set, and we're like, oh, this coronavirus, we got to start talking about it. And I think it was still largely believed to be confined to Asia at that point, although I think many of us are really thinking it was probably here December, January, right? We started to see spikes in people with fevers showing up to ERs, URI diagnoses. For the way it spread so quickly, it didn't come from the first person that was diagnosed, right? It was here. And so, when you kind of think of it that way, as we sat in that room, I thought this would be like, MERS or SARS or whatever, where, we talk about it, it's in China, Contagion, Outbreak, all those movies that we saw, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to get here. And then, we started talking about activating our decade-old response units and thinking about how to handle this. And then we got confronted with the first case or caseload, and all of a sudden everyone forgot everything that we've been trained to do. And everything that we thought we had in place was not where it needed to be. And, I think there's some hubris that came out in this. We were caught flat-footed as a country. Our government was caught flat-footed. Local communities were caught flat-footed. We as a state, as you and I have discussed, were caught very flat-footed. We did not have the infrastructure to handle the testing that was needed. We didn't have the knowledge about how to separate people and identify where things were occurring. And we did not leverage a lot of the resources we have in this state that could have very early been marshaled to create the machinery to help us get through this. And so I think we learned, but we learned late. And I think we started asking, but we started asking a little bit late. And that I think was the lesson from this. I think if anything, the lesson from this has to be, we can't let it repeat itself. That's the most important thing. I think the second lesson, and whether it's one or two in this, is that if we want these types of things to be less impactful on our communities, we need to make sure our communities are healthy and resilient prior to something like this being superimposed. We saw that social vulnerability, pre-existing health conditions, high blood pressure, diabetes, all the things that mattered before COVID mattered even more during COVID. And if we want to protect our society and our citizens, we have to figure out a way to deliver healthcare better, not just in pandemic times.
Yeah, because that basic level of how well do you resist these challenges to your system, it matters.
Yep. 100%.
Oh, phenomenal. That's wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough, Dr. Levy, for being here with us today. You impressed us the first time with your willingness to just speak straight down the middle to whatever needed to be said. Once again, you've done that. Can't tell you how grateful I am. We'll give just a couple more seconds for any attendees. If they've got any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I just want to thank you again for taking the time out today, and thank you to all those who have had to figure this out on the front lines. I remember well through many connections to folks in healthcare, how confusing it was at the beginning, and so many of you were there to just press through and discover many things along the way. So we appreciate you sharing those stories with us.
My pleasure, and always happy to come back, Gene. Should we be still at this in a couple of months or years? We'll see. But pleasure talking to your audience. And if any questions come up afterwards, feel free to send them to me, and I'll be glad to respond.
We appreciate it so much, Dr. Levy. Thank you so much again.
No problem. Thank you.
And we'll give the last 30 seconds here in case there's anyone with a community announcement that you want to tell us that's happening in the community. Feel free to raise a hand in Zoom there if you want to tell us what's happening in the community or in your organization that matters to the audience to know about. We'd love to know about it. Give it another 5 seconds here in case there's any. We had some good ones in some recent weeks, so I never want to miss that if it's there. Otherwise, don't forget about the biosocial coming up next week. We've got Dr. David Brophy going to tell us all about financing tech startups. It's going to be really fun before we get back to COVID for 2 weeks after that with the sessions I told you about before. Thank you so much for being with us on MedTech Crossroads. We'll see you next week.